Not far from the village of Llenodyn stood a large boulder called Carreg yr Ysbryd. It was said an evil spirit once tormented the people of Llenodyn. Trapped in a bottle, it was accidentally released one day to wreak havoc on the locals as a vengeful spirit which harassed those who lived in the area. One day, a local conjurer named Dick Spot came to the village and was begged by the village folk to help rid them of this terrible being. After much persuasion, he set off to help them with their plight. He lured the spirit to an open hole before capturing it in the quill of a pen, then dropping a large boulder on top. The spirit was trapped, never to torment the people of Llanwddyn ever again. Upon leaving, though, he spoke to the villagers. He had a grave warning for them. While the rock would help keep the spirit at bay, it was only temporary. Should the water work its way between the stone and the dry land, should the rock be disturbed, the spirit would return. By the year 1890, Llanwddyn was lost forever. It too became trapped when the water made its way to the dry land. When Llanwddyn became Vyrnwy, when Llanwddyn became this. By the mid-1950s, Liverpool's search for water had become desperate. The ever-expanding industrial district and another boom in population had created a need for clean drinking water. But it would not be the first time that Liverpool Corporation came looking to quench its thirst in Wales. If Dolanog was the stage rehearsal for Capel Celyn, Llanwddyn would set the scene some 75 years before. A distant echo that served Wales a warning: all things are temporary. Like the spirit that lay dormant under the rock, when the never-satisfied wheels of capital and industry start to falter, the spirit of destruction rises. It's those at the bottom who will pay the price. Much of what we know of Llanwddyn today is consigned to the history books. Like many villages throughout Wales during this time, it was often a footnote in newspapers and local articles. However, there are still several important records which can give us an idea of what life in Llanwddyn was like before its doomed fate in the late 1880s. Leading up to 1880, Llanwddyn was experiencing a change in the makeup of its population, most notably the demographics and population numbers. Between 1801 and 1861, there was steady growth in the area's population. However, by 1871, the numbers had begun to decrease. One area of interest was the numbers of elderly residents who seemed to outnumber the younger. As younger residents moved further afield for work in industrial towns and cities such as Liverpool, the elderly remained. Stories of headstones with ages ranging up into the hundreds and tens abound. Parish records show 18 entries of 90 plus, 121 records of 80 plus. The land of Llanwddyn was chiefly used for meadow or common land. There had been several attempts to mine slate, with limited success. The scars are still visible at the furthest end of the valley. Despite the changes to the population, one thing remained fixed: the beauty of the surrounding area.
But the tourist will be more than compensated when he enters the inlet at Reservoir, for here the scenery is at once changed as if by a magician's wand, and he is in the midst of scenery grand in point of colour, boldness and breadth, and picturesque by its roughness and contrast of foliage.
Picturesque, beauty beyond compare, and below it a sleepy village, ordinary for the time, with the Welsh language at the heart of the community. Who could have predicted that in a few short years, Llanwddyn would become anything other than ordinary? "68 miles away, a city faced the anxieties of an ever-growing and ever more demanding populace. Liverpool, like many other UK cities, saw a growth in population during the 1840s and 1850s. This growth was due to a couple of different factors. One was fueled by empire and expansion. The Industrial Revolution turned Liverpool into an industrial powerhouse, and many flocked to the city to find stable jobs. Another factor came from just across the water. Migrants from Ireland flocked to the city, exacerbated by the famine enforced on them during the mid-1800s. The years between 1850 and 1880 saw great growing pains for the city. Its need for clean water continued to grow, and conversations began around building a new reservoir for the city. At the time, Liverpool had two options for collecting water. One was at a reservoir in Rivington, 30 miles away from Liverpool, or by collecting it from wells within the city. Rivington had already been expanded, which had caused some bitter divisions between locals. By the mid-1860s, the Rivington reservoir system could hold around 300 million gallons of water. However, it was becoming increasingly clear to the city planners that much more was needed to quench the thirst of Liverpool. The Rivington reservoir expansion did not prove fruitful. Newspapers at the time claimed that the initial proposal of having clean water in constant supply to every household did not come to pass. In 1866, Liverpool's Water Committee commissioned its chief engineer with the task of finding a suitable location for a new state-of-the-art reservoir. They looked at several areas in England, including Lancashire and Westmoreland, Ullswater and Hayswater, and the rivers Hodder and Ribble. While great care was taken to ensure that all schemes were given a fair and impartial review, none of these were deemed worthy. Attention then turned from England and across the border into Wales. The initial research focused on Llyn Efyrnwy and the River Dee. It was determined that Bala could be a potentially lucrative spot to house the brand new reservoir. However, due to pressure from business, this plan was also dropped. After all the discussions, the objections and plans, only one suitable scheme remained. The news would have likely come down from the usual channels: newspaper reports, rumours of strangers visiting the local area, land surveys, tests, and plans. In September 1878, the villagers had been made aware of trial shafts being dug within the area. Most reports suggest that no formal consultation had been taken with the village. They'd been left in the dark as to Liverpool's intentions. By mid-1878, however, things became much clearer. In August of that year, papers both local and further afield began to report on the plans placed forward by the Liverpool Corporation. The plans had been worked on in secret for a number of years, and by 1878, they were ready to put in the necessary steps to gain permission to drown Llanwddyn.
The parliamentary notice of the Liverpool Corporation Waterworks Bill gives us fuller and more exact information than we possessed before of the vast undertaking which has excited public interest, much of it of a hostile kind, not in Liverpool and Llenodyn alone, but all along the course of the Severn.
The anxiety for those who were under the threat of losing their homes is clear. This wasn't, however, the first time that Llenodyn had faced a similar threat. Only 12 years before this proposal, a similar scheme had been devised, not by Liverpool, but by the City of London. During the late 1860s, there had been a royal commission to develop a vast reservoir, and Llanwddyn was an area that had been considered. While Liverpool was planning on drawing some 52 million gallons daily, the London proposal was around 4 times greater, at 230 million gallons. The plan was bold, ambitious, and ultimately costly. Not to the people of Llanwddyn, but to the coffers of those who were footing the bill. At £11,400,000 for the time, this massive undertaking was perhaps a step too far. Neither the impracticalities of the potential damage it could cause, nor the people of Llanwddyn killed the project, but the money. It could also be argued that the fate of Llanwddyn in the decade that followed was also decided not by those who lived on the land, but by those looking to make the biggest profit. Evidence of this can be found in the objections by the railway company when the Bala Lake extension had been initially suggested. It was believed that interfering with Bala Lake could have a detrimental impact on not only the local railway, but on the canal system further downstream. This didn't mean that the people initially took the decision lying down. Groups quickly formed in the local area to oppose the scheme. A petition was filed which contained around 300 names. This, however, seemed to die down rather quickly, with scant evidence now of this petition existing. There is some mention of it in villagers' interviews, although no clear record of the names exists. However, with a population of just over 400, this demonstrated that there was much anger in the surrounding area. With the relatively low impact a petition from the villagers would have had at the time, it makes sense that the campaign quickly faded from memory. Much more focus was given to the organisations that were set to make a loss if the scheme was to go ahead. 30 different organisations, ranging from fishing, waterworks, rivers and canals throughout the border area, opposed the scheme. This was, however, not for the sake of the villagers who were facing the loss of their homes, but more to do with potential impacts to their bottom line. Fishing was concerned that the reservoir would produce a lower yield of salmon. River companies worried that the reservoir would lower water along the River Severn. From Oswestry to Shrewsbury, Welshpool and further afield, groups came together to oppose the scheme, not for the sake of the village, but for their local areas. Interestingly, even from within Liverpool itself, some people believed that the scheme would have no tangible impact on their lives. Some went as far as saying that they should grin and bear the struggles of their life as their grandparents had before them. Much like the plans for London, it was business and not the people of Llanwddyn who would decide its fate. This had a demoralising effect on Llanwddyn. An interview in 1879 seems to suggest that the people of Llanwddyn had largely accepted that things were not in their hands. Even then, the embers of resistance burned. In one report, it is claimed that an elderly lady from the village refused to give up her property. It is said that she absolutely refused to leave her homestead voluntarily. She would have died under her own thatch. While no concrete evidence exists and is likely another of the many myths that shroud this story, it demonstrates that for some, hope and resistance remained. Between the end of 1879 and the middle of 1880, things moved quickly. The plans had been scrutinised, debated, argued, and finally it was ready to move into next gear. The plans were presented to Parliament, and despite the petition, the 30 organisations, and the questions even from those in Liverpool, on August 6th, 1880, Parliament passed the Vyrnwy Reservoir Bill. From that day, Llanwddyn's fate was sealed. There was no chance to let the event sink in, no opportunity to plan a counter-attack. The work began swiftly. On the 14th of July, just under 1 year since the vote had taken place, the first stone was set. From the roar of the cannons to the jubilance of the music, for those who came by appointment to visit, this was a moment of great celebration. Little attention was given to the chapel, the church, the hotel, the pub, and the homes which lay below them. While construction continued, the villagers turned to ways they could save their community as much as possible. This came in the form of compensation, a way for them to rebuild their homes as close to their ancestral homes, or to move further afield. It's said not a single property had to be compulsory purchased, and through various means, each person who lived in Llanwddyn was moved to new locations. Some chose to stay close by, with their new home a stone's throw away from the reservoir. Their old family homes so tantalizingly close. One can only imagine the feeling of longing at seeing where you played, worked, and grew up, prayed, and lived so close, yet completely out of reach. The memories slowly fading and drifting like the tides that would in a few short years lap at the shores of the lake. They could never return, never to walk the same streets, never to pray at the same spots. On the one hand, it is true that the people of Llanwddyn were on the whole compensated financially for the destruction of their homes, but you can never replace memories. And as the generations faded, so did the memories. By 1888, the work had been completed. Just 10 years. The reservoir was built, and the process of filling the vast alien landscape with water had begun. Work had commenced to tear down the homes, the chapel, the church, and hotel. Slowly and surely, day by day, week by week, the stones which told 1,000 tales were dismantled and moved. The church, which had been the site of prayer and celebration, of loss and recovery, was demolished. The hotel and pub, which had seen loves won and lost, now lay open to the elements. And as the people made their way to new homes, the waters began to take residence. The village as it once was no more. The water had finally worked its way through the rock and the dry land. High above the hills that encase this vast body of water, hidden within the trees, lies a forgotten obelisk. A long-forgotten memorial, a symbol to the might of human endeavour and to the power of nature's ability to take that humanity away. This memorial has 40 names, dedicated to those who lost their lives during the construction of the reservoir. This remains one of the only tangible links to the work that was undertaken here. A stone tower dwarfed by the trees, invisible to those who spend time at the lake. As the days became months Months became years, and years became decades. Llanwddyn became myth. The tales of drowned villages, the romanticised beauty of long-lost homes. The hiraeth. It had become a legend. Vyrnwy had firmly cemented itself as one of the beauties of the Welsh landscape. There's no denying that the striking beauty of the lake, its trees which seemingly reach the sky itself, are nothing short of breathtaking, and the lives of those who lived in old Lenoduin moved on. And perhaps it's this beauty, this myth, the romantic view of Vyrnwy which keeps Llenodyn alive. The desperate need for water, the need to fuel industry and empire, the surveyors, plans and schemes, all would play out again 75 years later, less than 20 miles away from the ruins of old Llanwddyn. Many of the stories you will find about Llanwddyn could be compared to the plan to drown both Dolanog and then Capel Celyn. The lack of formal consultation and the belief that in the march of progress, people could simply up and move their lives, their homes and their memories. Bessie Braddock, the MP for Liverpool during the planning of the Llyn Celyn scheme in the 1950s, directly linked both this new plan and Vyrnwy. While it is clear that the decision to drown both villages is steeped more in capital than humanitarian rationale, there is something to be said about the relatively weak position of Wales during the 1880s and in the 1950s. Cheap, easy to exploit, won't put up much of a fuss. This, could be argued, was another driving factor in why places in Wales were chosen, much the same way that easily exploited places have been used elsewhere. While it could be seen that Vyrnwy is the bigger sister to Llyn Celyn, there have been times where the emotional impact of the Llyn Celyn scheme came back to remind everyone that below Vyrnwy's beauty, a community lies. In 1967, 75 years after the drowning of Llanwddyn and 2 years after Capel Celyn slipped beneath the waters, a group of men silently crept into the town of Llanwddyn, close to the border between England and Wales. Their task was simple: to disrupt the pipeline between Lake Vyrnwy and Liverpool. The men armed with explosives set a charge on the pipeline as it crossed over the river. The subsequent explosion not only damaged the pipeline, but signalled the birth of Mudiad Amddiffyn Cymru. Alongside several others, this group would grow in both intensity and fame in the coming decade. Today, Vyrnwy is a romantic jewel in the Welsh crown. Its grand hotel overlooking the seemingly endless landscape of water, its beauty is difficult to argue against. But it is always important to remember what took place here over 100 years ago. So, what were the reasons for Llanwddyn's drowning? We see a city with an ever-increasing population, local councillors anxious to meet the demand, but we also see a small village, impossible to protect and doomed to die. Protest or pleading would not save it. The decision of who gained and who lost was completely down to those with the largest voice. If it was not here, or if, for whatever reason, powerful lobbyists had a stake in the area, chances are we would be looking at another location. Possibly in England, possibly in Wales. There are similarities and differences between what happened in Llanwddyn and what would transpire at Capel Celyn in the 1950s. However, it may be that instead of a comparison, we should look at how the Lake Vyrnwy scheme, alongside several others which would come in the next few years, would not only serve as a warning, but act as the fuel which would ignite the Welsh national spirit decades later. Like the waters that smash the rocks along the rivers of Vyrnwy, shaping and forming new paths, Llyn Efyrnwy smashed against the rock of the Welsh psyche, allowing new paths to develop in the form of protest and rebellion. Vyrnwy is one piece of the vast tapestry of events, providing the fuel for protests sparked by Capel Celyn. Llanwddyn and Capel Celyn are inextricably linked, their fates intertwined. But the question still remains, is Llanwddyn forgotten? The sudden explosion of national unity came in 2019 for Capel Celyn, with the destruction and subsequent rebuilding of the Tryweryn Wall. While this led to Mynydd Epynt and other sites becoming a part of the national conversation again, it seems that Llanwddyn has been in some ways forgotten. This could be due to the age of the schemes. Llanwddyn has now been lost for over 130 years, while Celyn only some 70. Memories have become stories, and in turn become legend. It could also be argued that the secondary village which was rebuilt during the time takes the sting out of the event. On the other hand, it is important to remember each part of Wales's history and how each one interconnects and intertwines with the other. To understand the intentions of Liverpool can help us understand what happened with Capel Celyn. It could be said that Llanwddyn was the fuel which set off the fire of rebellion in the coming century. While Llanwddyn's name is not painted on walls and discussed in as much detail, it's still an important part of our nation's history. Should the water work its way between the stone and the dry land, should the rock be disturbed, the spirit would return.